Hey there. Today let's take a look at what's probably the most popular song at your local bluegrass jam, Blackberry Blossom. And specifically, take a look at all the different ways you can create variations for this really cool tune. The song was one of the first to be performed in what has become known as the melodic style by this gentleman right here, Bill Keith, around the year 1962-63. The solo that Bill played was tabbed out in Tony Trishka's famous book, Melodic Banjo. So when first learning the song, it's a good idea to have a break that sounds somewhat like what Bill played. So here's my interpretation of his opening break. So Blackberry Blossom is a fiddle tune. It has two sections, a part A, a part B. Each is 8 measures long, and each gets repeated. Fiddle tunes, their phrases tend to break into groups of 2 measures, and that's the case of Blackberry Blossom. So learning the technique on how to change out licks in this fiddle tune will serve you well when you try to do it with other tunes. Notice that the chords are exactly the same for phrases 1 and 3, and in fact, the notes that Bill Keith played the first time through were the same in each of those phrases. So to create variations to the Blackberry Blossom melody, we're going to take it phrase by phrase. So here's an idea that you could swap out for the first 2 measures, which forms phrase 1, or measures 5 and 6, which forms phrase 3. As you come up with variations, you'll want to keep at least some characteristics of the original melody. In this case, I kept the idea of a descending scale line going. So following the idea of having a descending melody line, you could just base it on the background chords. The background chords are G, D, C, and G. So I'll use chord forms that allow me to move down the neck. And I was just using a forward-backward roll. See if you can spot how this variation is only a couple notes different than the original melody. We now move on to our second phrase, which plays against these chords, a C to a G and the very distinctive A going to D. This first variation for phrase 2 contains the exact same notes that Bill played, but on a different location on the neck. Our next variation for phrase 2 makes it a little more obvious that you're going through an A chord on the way to D. Here's another variation for phrase 2 that takes a little bit longer to wrap up. If you're working through the chord idea that we previously presented, your phrase 4 might go something like this. Still playing against the chord. Here's where the D chord comes in and we're playing. So here's how we'll turn our original phrase 2 from Bill Keith into an ending, so phrase 4. And here's our second idea turned into phrase 4. All of our ideas thus far have concluded by continuing to work their way lower. On this ending, we will work our way back up. We now will move on to part B, which begins on an E minor chord. As you work your way through phrase 5, phrase 6 will also start on E minor but end with a B7. When you come down to phrase 7, it is the same as phrase 5, so we can interchange those phrases. And when you get to phrase 8, if you look closely, it's the same as the way we ended part A. So that will be phrase 4 or 8 could be interchanged. To give you a little insight as to how I come up with variations, I sometimes look for changing the timing of the notes. Instead of having a roll where it's all eighth notes, maybe throw in some quarter notes, some syncopation, anticipate the beat. Another way is to simply go to a different position on the neck, especially based around the chord position. And lastly, I might try using a different technique. This song is known for playing in the melodic style. You get to this E minor on part B, people start using rolls and using Scruggs style. I'll give you a variation that uses the Reno single string style. So here's a phrase similar to what most people play during the first measures of E minor. Notice I kept that second finger down even though I was rolling the open strings. You want to keep that E sound in the lick. So here's a phrase 5 where I vary the timing of the notes. In this variation of phrase 5, I go to a different E minor position. Here's an E minor chord up at the 4th fret. And I'm going to put my second finger in behind my pinky on string 1 so that I can play this. And as promised, here's a somewhat Reno lick that could be used for phrase 5 over the E minor. Since phrase 6 starts on an E minor chord, often what you played in the first measure of E minor here, you will play again here before adding some notes that sound the B7 chord. Here's our first phrase 6. And our second phrase 6. And the third phrase 6. And the final variation for phrase 6. Because phrase 5 and phrase 7 can interchange, the same with phrases 4 and 8, we now have all the phrases we need to come up with all kinds of variations for Blackberry Blossom. A quick mention before we play the complete song. This measure right here, back in the early recordings of the song, sometimes would just be a measure of E minor, or it might be just a measure of G. There's several variations. So I now will play a completely improvised solo using many of the licks that we just went over. Being that it is completely improvised, you may hear a lick or two that we didn't have a chance to go over, and recognize how the phrases fit the pattern. Realize you can use this type of improvisation working out licks for any fiddle tune.